My name's Malcolm Groves. Let me bring this up. My name's Malcolm Groves. I work for Code Partners, just upstairs on level 4. Actually, I've got a slide in a second that tells you who we are. Thanks for coming to the meetup. I think this is our second official meetup. There was one earlier one in the pub, but I don't know if that counts or not. It was good. It was good fun. Yep, this is the second one we've had in this venue. So thanks for coming along. I'll get the meetup pitch out of the way first. Always looking for people to present interesting topics. So if you've got stuff you're doing at work around Jenkins or Jenkins, given what the meetup is, if you've got interesting stuff, talk to me, talk to James. If you haven't met James, James is the other organiser, James from CloudBees. Definitely, please come and tell us about what you might be able to talk about. You'll get very tired of hearing me and James present repeatedly. Well, not James. You'll never get tired of hearing James present, but me, you'll get sick of it. Okay, pitch out of the way. Well, I'll try and corner some of you over beer and pizza later on. So this is what I wanted to talk about tonight. Relatively recently, we've been doing pipeline for a little while, but relatively recently I sort of dove into declarative pipelines. And it's not too hard, but there's a few things I learned along the way that made it much easier to do and took away some of the sort of pain or frustration. So partly tonight I just want to get you going in declarative pipelines, what it is, how you get started, and also kind of some of that stuff about how can you make it a bit easier on yourself. Yeah. I work for a company called Code Partners, and my animation in PowerPoint didn't work out very well. We basically do development, deployment, consulting, training services. So around developer tools, architectural guidance, right through to ALM type tools, developer process type stuff, continuous delivery, test automation, test management, that kind of stuff. Yeah. And the tie-in tonight is we're the CloudBees local partners. Yeah. So if you, I've got guys upstairs and in Melbourne who are CloudBees certified. So if you need some help or need some expertise or need some training or whatever, that's what we do. Okay. So two craven pitches out of the way. The rest is the content of the actual session. So, like I said, I want to talk about declarative pipelines. Just let me ask a couple of questions first. I'm making some assumptions here. I'm assuming, probably safely, that you are all using Jenkins. Yeah, anyone not using Jenkins? Okay, good, you're in the right place. How many people have actually started using pipeline? A few of you? In anger or just playing with it? In anger? Okay, cool. I'm assuming, how many have actually started using declarative pipeline as opposed to the Groovy sort of scripted pipeline? Okay, cool. Okay, one, all right. Well, hopefully there's still something in this for you. We'll see. Cool. All right, so hopefully I'll try and, for those of you who haven't tackled pipeline or tried using it, I'll try and give you the pitch about why pipeline exists, why it matters, why it's a good thing. Basically, the idea with pipeline, if you think about freestyle jobs, okay? For those of you who aren't using pipeline, you're probably using predominantly freestyle jobs, and you'll go into the Jenkins UI itself and do a bunch of configuration of your jobs and all the tasks within those jobs, yeah? And all of that configuration exists inside Jenkins persists it and exists within that, but it's all within Jenkins. It's not an artifact that you are maintaining with the rest of your application. Yeah, it's all configuration that you've done. Yeah? And so that's what pipeline is trying to. One of the things that pipeline is trying to solve is that the pipeline, your definition of your CD pipeline, is code, and it's actually code that's managed usually in the repository with the rest of your application code, and it evolves with your application code. You do a new version of your app that's got some new service, your pipeline needs to adjust to do it, they get committed together. Yeah? And if you do checkout of some old version of your application, you'll get that version of pipeline, the appropriate pipeline at the time. So it just becomes an artifact that gets managed with the rest of your application. Yeah. So that's kind of nice. There's very little actually inside Jenkins itself. Your pipeline exists externally. Yeah, I mean, Jenkins pulls it in and executes it. Yeah. So that's kind of nice. It's version with the rest of your applications. This is actually a really big one, even if you don't care about that. Pipelines can survive a Jenkins restart. Yeah. Whereas if you've ever had like a freestyle job that runs for 6 hours and on the 5th hour you either purposely or probably usually more often not on purpose, you drop Jenkins. When you start it all back up again, you start your 6-hour job again. Yeah. Pipelines can survive that and pick up, and continue on, which is, massive, yeah, from my point of view. Even if you don't care about pipeline as code, which you should, surviving those restarts is really cool. Yeah. And it's when I say pipeline as code, it really is code. It's Groovy based. Yep. And so you've got all the flexibility that you've got inside a programming environment. Yeah. You want to do really tricky, conditional statements around steps. Well, it's a programming environment. Knock yourself out. Okay. Even to the point of having, we were just talking about this before, about shared objects, about defining a whole bunch of common pipeline pieces and saving them off as shared objects and having them be accessible from other people writing pipelines. Yep. So that's all awesome. In fact, I've got a slide that says that's awesome. Yeah. So sorry, let me step back. That Groovy-based version is what is referred to as scripted pipelines. Yep. So so that's all great. Yeah. So what am I talking about? Yeah, I'm not talking about scripted pipelines. I'm talking about this thing called declarative pipelines. So why does that exist if this is so awesome? So, I mean, it is awesome, but there's a few, I don't want to say problems, but there's some challenges that we see people striking with scripted pipelines. Yep. There is some element of people backing away from adopting it because of Groovy. And not in particular Groovy, but because it's not necessarily a language they know, a lack of Groovy skills. Yeah. Even though, this is always a funny one, because if you actually look at the pipelines, the scripted pipelines, they're not terribly complicated, and you don't have to know all that much Groovy to write them. But there is, in some cases, just a perception, but in some cases, a genuine aversion to learning a new language and tackling this thing. People get comfortable doing what they're doing, and this is has been a barrier for some people. Yeah. One thing that I can sympathise with more, I guess, is that in a scripted pipeline, it's a programming language. You've got lots of there's multiple ways to solve every problem, and you've got lots of flexibility about how you do it. And as a result, there's not always a lot of commonality in the resulting pipeline. And looking at the pipeline, it's not always immediately obvious what happens. In many cases, you have to dive in and read through it and almost be the interpreter, be the Groovy runtime going through and going, okay, what's actually happening here before you can appreciate what's going on. So that is a bit of a barrier in terms of understanding, readability. This is a big one. Without running the pipeline, it's really hard. I don't want to say impossible, but maybe it is impossible, to know whether it's right or not. And so if you've got a pipeline that takes even 20 minutes to run, or 10 minutes to run, and you run it and wait and wait and wait, and 8 minutes into that 10-minute run, you realise, oh, you've got a stupid error that you put in, and so you have to go back and edit it, kick it off again, and wait another X amount of time. Yeah. So this is a problem, not being able to validate that your pipeline is correct, your scripted pipeline is correct, without just executing it and seeing. Yeah. And again, because of the flexibility that scripted pipeline gives you, it can be tough to write tooling around it. Yeah. Having two-way visual sort of editor for scripted pipeline is really challenging because there's so many ways that you could do things, yep, and represent things. Yep. So how do you visualize that? Yeah. So these are all things that were some of the triggers for creating this thing called declarative pipeline. Yeah. Yeah.
So that's because the pipeline is really a program that builds a pipeline data structure.
Yeah, it's effectively it's a programming language. Yep. And so you could implement things in there any sort of way you like.
So it's like CMake or something, as opposed to like Puppet is a programming language as well, but it's very well suited to the description of system configurations, whereas like the Groovy like a lot of these things you seem to be saying that you write a program which produces a data structure which which is a pipeline, and
no, what's the best way to explain this? The Groovy script that you write is the pipeline, yeah, but it's not. Well, you'll see when we get into declarative pipeline. A declarative pipeline is a lot more opinionated in some ways, in that there's a way to structure things, and there's a place where you put certain things, and that's the place where you put them. Whereas in the scripted pipeline, it's to a certain degree, you've got some of that, but to a certain degree, you've got a lot more flexibility, which is awesome, but that also comes at a cost of some of these other things that I'm talking about, you know. What is it, the Spider-Man thing? Great power comes with great responsibility and challenges. Yeah. Okay, so that's kind of where the declarative pipeline stuff's coming from. Yeah. So declarative pipeline, it is still pipeline. Okay, it's an alternative to scripted pipeline, but it's still all the goodness we were talking about pipeline before still applies. Yeah, it's just an alternative approach to actually defining your pipelines. Yeah, so it's intended to be more approachable, and in our experience, we found it is much more approachable. You don't need to know any Groovy, even though with scripted pipelines, the amount of Groovy you need to know is usually minimal. You can get away with not knowing any Groovy in declarative pipelines. Yeah, and also for some reason, the perception is that you don't need to know any as well. You know, people don't see it as scary. They look at it and go, "Oh, I can see what that does." Yeah, much more readable. Kind of the structure of it communicates what it's doing to a certain extent. Yeah, you'll see that in a second. And because of some of the constraints and the declarative nature of it, the tooling can be much more helpful to us. So you'll see not just the two-way editor, but there's other tools that I'll show you later on that help you solve a lot of these problems and work in a much more shorter cycle. Yeah. Okay, makes sense? So, and it's still Jenkins file based. So when you've been doing scripted pipelines and you've had a Jenkins file in your repo, you still have a Jenkins file in your repo. It just happens to be contained in a declarative pipeline rather than a scripted pipeline. Yeah. So those things don't change. Cool. So I'm going to go into detail about the different bits that can go in it, but just so that we all know what, I can stop waving my hands around and we all know what we're talking about, I'll just do a quick hello world of declarative pipelines. We'll go deeper, I promise, but this is kind of the getting started one. So what have I got? At the moment, I've just created a quick empty GitHub repo, okay? Meetup test. It's got nothing in it. What I'm going to do is go into Jenkins. Oh, maybe I should have said at the start, the easiest way to get your hands on pipeline and declarative pipeline is just to install Blue Ocean. It'll bring in pipeline and declarative pipeline and all of the editor and all that sort of stuff. Can you run declarative pipeline without Blue Ocean?
Yes.
You can? Okay.
Fine.
Yeah, you wouldn't.
Blue Ocean's awesome.
Blue Ocean's awesome, but yeah, I guess you could. Yeah. I assume the editor is dependent on Blue Ocean.
One advantage that you build, so we actually test all of the Jenkins plugins that make up declarative pipeline, Blue Ocean, anything you want to do with pipeline, we make sure that it's all there for you. So you just install that
Yeah. Cool, cool. So yeah, that's the easiest way. If you're not already got it, just grab open. I'm using open source Jenkins. Just grab open source Jenkins, install Blue Ocean. You'll have the bits you need. Okay. Okay. So once you go into Blue Ocean, there's a new pipeline button. I'll show you what's behind the scenes, but I'll walk you through the sort of getting started bit. So there's a nice sort of process of walking through, asking where is your repo. Okay, so mine's up on GitHub. Goes off, checks out which organization, which GitHub org I want to create. It gives me an option about whether I want to create a new pipeline from a single repository or get it to sort of look through that org for repos that have already got Jenkins files in them and do that discovery. So in this case, I'm just going to create a new pipeline. It's found a whole bunch of repos. What was mine called? Meetup test or something. Yeah, there it is. Meetup test. Meetup test. Okay. Let it create that pipeline. I think at this stage it gives me one last chance to change my mind. Yep, I know there's no Jenkins files. Create it. Okay. So it then throws me straight into the visual editor for pipelines. Yep. So we'll create a few steps and stages and other things in here. But then I promise, I will show you what it's doing behind the scenes, because most of what I'm going to talk about is the behind the scenes stuff. Yeah. Okay, so we've got our starting point for our pipeline, so we can come in here and specify our different agent settings. I'll go through what these are, but this is just basically specifying where your pipeline's going to run. Okay, so in this case, you can specify a label or talk to Docker. I'll go into that in a minute. But I'm just going to say any. You can specify some environment variables, so I'll just quickly do one which is, I don't know, name, Fred Flintstone. Okay, but then this next part across here, this plus, lets me start creating stages. Yeah? And so stages are really just a way of breaking up all of the steps that you need to do inside your pipeline and sort of categorizing them together. Yeah? And so we can do things like say, I'm going to have some obvious ones. I'm going to have a build stage. Yeah? And then within that, I can then add steps. Within each stage, I can say, add step, and this goes and looks at all of the plugins that I have installed at the moment and finds any pipeline steps that are defined in those plugins. Yeah. So I'm actually, in this particular case, we've got a lot of customers who are Windows dev shops, and so in this particular case, I'm talking to a Jenkins instance running on Windows. So I'll use the Windows batch script, but there's a shell script one as well in there if you want to use that. So let's do a Windows script. I'll just do something simple like, what did I call that environment variable before? Was it name? Okay. I'll just do something simple like that. I can create more steps, have as many as I like. I can create subsequent stages. So I'll do one which is, I don't know, test, and add another step to it. Okay. I promise I'll do more than echoes before the end of the night. And I can also go in and say, okay, within a particular stage, I want to have parallel steps going on. Excuse me. So in this case, inside our build step, we've got this, inside our build stage, we've got this step going on. But I can say, okay, I want to have a second stage called, I don't know, build 2, for want of a better word. I can't think of a good name for it right now, and I can define a step in, multiple steps inside that. Yeah. So there we go. So from a ramping up point of view, it's so far it's relatively gentle sort of learning curve. Yeah. Let me just put that in there. All right. But here's where I guess when we click save, yeah, what this is going to want me to do, what it's going to do is go and generate the Jenkins file and commit it back into that repo for me. Yeah? So it actually wants me to put in a commit message, basically. So I'll just say initial pipeline, and commit to master. And what this is going to do is commit this back up to my GitHub repo, yep, and then actually start the process of running it. Yep. Pull it down, check out the GitHub repo, which will be nothing in it, or just the Jenkins file in this case, and start executing my steps. So if I actually go into it while it's happening, we can see it's doing its checkout, okay, of that Meetup test. We can see it's gone through and executed my different steps, which, because I'm just doing echoes, executed fairly quickly. Yeah, cool. Now, you shouldn't be too impressed with that, because it's a whole bunch of echoes inside a, it's not actually doing very much. Yeah. So let's actually have a look what it's done for us though. This is what I wanted to get to. So if I refresh my repo, we can see now it's not empty. We've got a Jenkins file up here. Yeah. And if we go into this, we can actually see this is the declarative pipeline that it's built for us. Yeah. And based on what you just saw in the visual editor, this should be reasonably understandable. Yeah? We've got an environment block where I've got my environment variables that I set up to be declared. There's my agent directive saying that I want it to run on any available agent. And then I've got a stages section. Yep. And within it, I've got a stage called build and a stage called test. Okay, and within each of those, I've got steps. Yeah, and in my build stage, this is the one where I had parallel ones going on. So you can see here, we've got wrapped inside a parallel statement. We've got here's my build, and here's my build 2 stages. So the structure almost sort of the structure is very descriptive of what's going on. The behavior in the pipeline is reflected in the structure, and equally the visualization, both the editor and the runtime results of your pipeline are also quite sort of closely mapped to the structure of your pipeline, your declarative pipeline. Yeah. So from that point of view, it's quite nice. People look at the pipeline, they come in and look at the visualization. It's really clear mapping for them between when they're getting started, between this thing failed, there they can spot it really quickly in the pipeline. Yeah. Okay. So that's sort of hello world a little bit more than hello world of declarative pipelines. Yeah. Make sense? Any questions on that so far? Yeah. Sorry, say that again?
I just wonder, is this the Groovy or something else?
This, my understanding is that the declarative pipeline is actually still under the covers Groovy, and in fact, I'll show you later on in particular steps, you can embed Groovy code in them. So yeah, under the covers, we're still using Groovy as the sort of execution engine. Yeah, it's almost like a DSL for writing rather than having to jump down and write Groovy code yourself. Yeah. Make sense? Yeah. Cool. Okay. So let's go a little bit deeper. So I'm just keeping my eye on that to make sure it's still streaming out. Let's go back over here. So we've already seen some of these sections already. So if we take a much more simplified version, okay, basic structure, the whole file is wrapped in a pipeline section, okay, and the stages section sort of specifies what's going to run, what the pipeline's actually going to do, okay. So you'll have one or more stage directives inside your stages section, and each stage will contain one or more steps. Yeah, make sense? Okay, so that's almost the minimal pipeline, declarative pipeline that you can have. The other bit that you need to have is your agent directive. Okay. And whereas your stages is saying what your pipeline's basically going to do, your agent is saying where it's going to do it, where it's going to run. Okay. Now you can put agents in a couple of places, but if you put them like this one up at the pipeline level, this is basically saying our entire pipeline is going to run on this particular agent. And so here I've said any because I don't have a preference. I can run on any agent. But in fact, you can go through and say, you can specify a label. So you can say, I want this to run on a Windows-based agent, or an agent that's got these, whatever your label structure is for selecting agents. Yeah. You can specify none, which I'll show you in a second, which maybe doesn't make any sense if this is saying where it's going to run, and we say it's not going to run anywhere. But there's a point to that. I'll show you in a sec. But there's some other interesting ones as well, like Docker and Dockerfile. Docker being the ability to specify a Docker image name, and say run these steps inside this image. Okay. Or Dockerfile, kind of one step back from that, where you can specify a Docker file, and Jenkins will use that Docker file to build an image, and then run the steps within the resulting image from the Docker file. Yeah. So there's some sort of pre-built agent values in here, which are pretty useful. I should have actually said at the start that the declarative pipeline syntax is actually quite extendable. As part of the SDK docs, you can go in and see there's a bunch of extension points where you can jump in and write your own sort of add-ons for these. Yep. So that's putting the agent up at the pipeline level, but you can also specify that at per stage as well. So for example, this example, this is where I've got agent at the pipeline level saying none, yeah. But then at each stage I get to jump in and say, well, this example build stage is going to run in this Docker image with these steps, and then this stage is going to run inside this other Docker image with these steps. Yeah? So you get to choose whether you just do the whole pipeline in one place, or whether different stages are run in different agents. Yeah, make sense? Okay. Like I say, it depends on that one at the pipeline level being none. So, a couple more things to say about stages. Okay, we've kind of got the minimal, so let's go expanding a little bit more to see what extra stuff we can add in. You can have conditional stages. So this example here is where we're saying our example deploy stage, we've got a when statement, and we're saying when the branch that that we've checked out is production, then do these steps. Okay. If it's some other branch from the repo, we wouldn't do these steps. Yeah? So you can do one way of doing conditional stages, and only running the steps in this stage when a particular branch value. Yeah. But there's some other ones as well. So you can do branch like we just talked about there. You can match to environment variables. So I've seen some places that do environment variables to specify whether this is a QA build or a production build, or all sorts of things like that. So you could have certain stages that only run when they match to an environment variable that's been defined to have a value. Yep. Or if you really want more control, you can drop in and do an expression here, a Groovy expression, and if that evaluates true, then your stage will run. Your steps in your stage will run. Okay, make sense? So we can start to get a little bit more tricky where we have the same pipeline running and performing slightly different based on what the configuration is. Okay, so that's all sort of fine, but we haven't done anything yet. All we're doing is getting ready to do something. Yeah? And that's where the steps come in. This is where we actually get stuff to happen, where we actually perform work. Yeah. And so the steps block sits inside the stage, okay, and has one or more steps that occur, each on their own line. Okay, so there's no semicolons to separate them or anything like that. Basically, step per line. Yeah. So in this case, you can see we're doing a couple of things. We're archiving some artifacts out of probably one of the earlier build steps, and then we're also publishing a unit test report into Jenkins, yeah, inside this test stage. Yeah. So the steps here that we've put in here can be a few different things. Yeah. Like these ones, the archive and JUnit, and I just used the Windows batch one a second ago. You saw that big drop down inside the editor. These are basically pipeline build steps. So these have been steps that have been registered through one of the plugins that you've got installed to be accessible from inside your pipeline. Yeah. And in fact, if you're using that, there's a nice little piece inside Jenkins where if I jump back out to if I jump back out of Blue Ocean and go into my pipeline syntax link, okay, in here there's a little snippet generator. Yeah. So what it lets me do, if you're not sure what to type in on that in here, you can't remember what to stick in after JUnit. Yeah. If you come into the snippet generator, this basically shows you all of the steps that are registered in this instance. Yep. And we can say, oh, okay, where's I think I've got JUnit in here. Yep, there we go. There's JUnit, and it prompts you to put in all the different values that you might put in. Let's say star.xml, yes, and allow empty results, and then it will actually generate the snippet for you, and you can copy it out of there and paste it into your pipeline. Yeah, makes sense. So it's just a nice little shortcut. You don't have to remember all of the syntax for every single step that you've got involved. Yeah. Okay. So these steps can be, like in this case, pipeline build steps, okay, that have been particularly registered for it. They can also be, oh, this isn't building very nice. It can also be like we saw before, it can be a parallel statement. So here where within this stage, we've broken out to parallel to do some static analysis of our code and also, a security scan of our code. There's no reason those things can't happen in parallel. They're not dependent on each other, so we can run them on different executors. Yeah. So we can have build steps, we can have a parallel statement, or we can have a script statement. And this is kind of where, where if you're thinking, okay, this is all fine, but it's not flexible enough for me, this is where a lot of the flexibility, you can still get access to a lot of the flexibility you have in scripted pipeline, but selectively. Yeah? So you can drop in a script step and basically write Groovy code within that script step. Yeah? And in many cases, so far, a lot of the cases I've found, you can basically just copy the steps out of a scripted pipeline, a step from within scripted pipeline, and pretty much paste it in here. Yeah? So it kind of lets you dip your toe into scripted pipeline when you need to. Like in this case, we want to loop over an array of different browsers and do something, without having to without having to give up all of the declarative pipeline goodness. Yeah, make sense? Cool. Okay. Okay. So steps, we've got pipeline, we've got stages, we've got steps within a stage. There's a few more things that are useful to be able to do. Environment blocks. You saw me do one of these before. Essentially, these are name value pairs that Jenkins will take care of defining as environment variables. Okay. So we had one like this top one before, an environment, where we did the name equals Fred Flintstone. Yeah. But one of the nice things is that these are scoped, so you can actually specify them at the pipeline level, or you can specify them at the stage level, and their visibility is scoped. So if you do it at the stage level, like this one here where we've got the myKey environment variable, okay, it's only going to be visible, or it's only going to be defined, that environment variable is only going to be defined for steps within that stage. Okay, once we move down to the next stage, that environment variable is no longer defined for us. Okay, cool. So that's kind of nice. You can be very selective and control the scope of where these things are visible. The other part is that you can see here that credentials, we've got this sort of credentials helper function here. This lets you reach into any predefined credentials that you've got defined in Jenkins already, whether it's username and passwords or secrets or whatever else, and reference them and grab them and use them inside your steps. Yeah. So that's kind of nice. It's really straightforward, just to be able to define these things in credentials inside Jenkins, and then inside your script just say, I want this secret or I want this username password, without having to embed it inside your pipeline. Yeah. Cool, makes sense? Cool. All right, a couple more, and then we'll dive out and do some more code, and I'll show you some of the tools. Okay. Another one that I actually like, because I'm a shocker for forgetting to put inside a scripted pipeline. You know, like a freestyle job, it's really easy to be able to say, okay, at the end of the job, I want these things to run, you know, regardless of whether the job failed or whatever. Inside a scripted pipeline, you've got to remember to wrap these things in try blocks. Yeah? And if you forget, as I often do, then you know, all your steps at the end that are saying I want to report this and I want to notify this, if it fails, they just never get to it. Yeah? It's a programming language. If you want certain stuff to always happen, you've got a code that it always happens. Yeah? Declarative pipeline gives us back that kind of easy, you know, easy place to put all of these end of pipeline functions. Yeah. So in this case, we've got a post section at the end of our pipeline where we're saying, okay, always do these things, always archive our artifacts away and publish our test results, but then also on failure do these things. And there's actually a whole bunch of conditions that you can put in there and say, okay, always makes sense. I think failure, success, and unstable probably makes sense when they run. Yes, everybody understands. You know, changed is an interesting one. That's basically if this, if the result of this pipeline, last time the pipeline failed, this time it succeeded. Great, that's changed. Yep, the status has changed, so we'll run it in this time. We'll run the steps inside this post section this time. Next time the pipeline runs and it succeeds again, well, that hasn't changed now. The prior run also succeeded. Yeah, so it lets you be a little bit, give you a little bit more control over having things occur only after you've fixed the build, for example. The successful run after a failure. Yeah. And the other cool thing is that this is, I've got them here at the end of the entire pipeline, but you can also define them per stage. So you can say, when this stage succeeds, do these things, and then go on to the next stage. Yeah. So you can have a combination of those. Yeah. Did you have a question?
So what's unstable? Difference between failure and unstable?
So you might have some tests that fail, but that don't signify that the whole build has failed. Do you know what I mean? Maybe it's like a warning. It might be one way of explaining it. Yep. So it's something you want to know about, but it doesn't necessarily mean that the pipeline has failed. Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Okay, there's a few other sections that I'm not going to go into in a whole bunch of detail, but I'll at least make you aware of them. There's an options section which, as the name suggests, lets you set options for the pipeline. Things like timeout periods, things like, actually I didn't state it explicitly, but in a scripted pipeline, if you want to check out the repo, you have to type in the code to check out the repo. The declarative pipeline just assumes that most of the time you'll want to check out the repo that the Jenkins file is in, so it just does it for you. Yeah? And the 1 times out of 10 or whenever that you don't want to, you can set the skip default checkout option, yeah? So that it doesn't do it for you. Yeah? So it's nice in that way. It's opinionated, but the opinions try to line up with what the most common scenarios are. Yeah? So there's the option section. There's a few more options in there that you can specify. There's tools section. So for example, if you've got defined in Jenkins particular Maven versions or JDKs, that kind of stuff, that you want to have installed before your stage, at the start of your stage, before your steps run, there's a tools section you can specify and say, okay, I want to use this version of Maven or this version of this JDK or whatever it is. Okay. There are alternative triggers. So there's a trigger section. What I've just done by default is going to be triggered by webhooks from GitHub or from your Git repository. Firewalls, all sorts of stuff get in the way that makes that not always possible. So you can define a trigger section and say, I want to schedule this, like on a cron, you actually use cron syntax to say, I want this to run every whatever period of time. You can there's a few other options in there that you can go through, but basically there's a trigger section you can define if you want to not use that default sort of, or can't use that default webhook behavior. And then there's also a parameters section where you can define parameters that this kind of infers that it's a build that's triggered by a person, a pipeline that's triggered by a person, because at the start of the pipeline it will prompt for values for these parameters. So someone can type in, yes, I'm doing a pipeline for, you know, this operating system, or this whatever value I want to type in, and then have that substituted in and available for your steps. Okay. So these are there. There's actually I put in a link here just so where you can get more details on those. Okay. But they're, you know, I think I've probably rabbited on and bored you enough with slides for a while, and I think the pizza's going to be here shortly. So just remember, before we get back into the demos, the thing about declarative pipelines are they're trying to make the typical scenarios easy, okay? And actually they go beyond that. They're reasonably flexible with the ability to put in steps that are Groovy scripted and that sort of thing. You can actually do a lot of scenarios through declarative, but declarative pipelines are not trying to solve all problems. Yeah? You've always got scripted pipelines as your fallback position if what you are trying to do is so complicated and so complex that these corner cases that declarative pipeline just won't bend to your will, then that's what scripted pipeline's for. Yeah? But it's actually surprising how much declarative pipelines cover, how much flexibility you end up with. Okay, so that kind of makes sense? What they're for, what the different sections are. Think back to that bit I showed you at the start, yeah, where I went into I went in and I used the editor or not, but I went in and I made some changes or edited my declarative script, my declarative pipeline, and then checked it into my repo, okay? If I was in the editor, it basically checked it in and committed it for me. But you know, if you could imagine if you were editing it just in a text editor, you'd basically commit it to your local repo, push it up to GitHub, either wait or then go in and trigger the pipeline to run. Now that cycle is not, it's a bit cumbersome. Yeah? You're going to go a little bit crazy if that's the development cycle you're using for building your pipelines. Yeah? You don't have to. You can shorten it way up with a bunch of features that are built in. Okay? So let's actually dive out and have a look at that. The first one that I want to tell you about is this thing called, let me go back into, back in here. If I go into one of my builds, one of my successful builds, okay, on the left-hand side here, there's this thing called replay, okay? So I could dive back in, and you know, the editor is two-way, so it'll parse the Jenkins file that you've got and represent it to you, and you can add more stages or whatever. But if I just want to quickly just edit it and try running it again without going through that whole cycle, that's what replay's for. So if you go into a build that's already run once and click replay, what it actually gives you is your Jenkins file, your declarative script, okay? And you can edit in place, okay? So let's, I don't know, let's copy one of these guys. Let's copy that, let's paste that and say, okay. And then I can immediately just click run, okay? And it'll throw me back in and it'll try executing that again. Yep, so I didn't have to commit it back into my repo. I didn't have to then do another checkout, okay? It's basically just executing it straight away for me, okay? And I'll show you, I'll let it finish, okay? So we can go in and we can see that, I can't remember which one I edited. If we go into the logs, yeah, here we go. You can see that it's executed that extra step that I put in. But if we have a look up at our repo, you'll see that step's not in my Jenkins file yet. Okay, it's just local. Yeah.
But mine is integrated replay functionality, and that's the replay.
Oh, beautiful.
Load inside.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, so that's not there yet. So you can that's one way, we can get it shorter even again, but that's one way you can go to say, okay, I want to bring this cycle down, this cycle time down of trying something out, running it, editing it, backwards and forwards. Okay. And typically what I do, that's, you don't necessarily have to, let me close that. If I go back in here now and click replay again, you can edit it in place in here, but typically what I'll do is jump out to my editor and edit it in the editor and then copy it and paste it back in. Yeah. In fact, let me just do, I think I'm in the right place. Let me just bring up the terminal. Yes, let me pull that down. So git pull, what is it, master origin. Have I got the right way around? I can never tell. Branch and then remote. It's the other way around, is it? Okay. So let me get my Jenkins file down because I don't actually have it in the local repo. Okay. So here's my Jenkins file. And I'll just tell it that it actually is a Jenkins file. Okay. So, you can paste it in there, edit it, copy it out, paste it in the other one, keep doing replay. So that's one thing. Okay. The problem we've still got, though, is that we have to basically go through so when your pipeline executes, one of the first things that happens is it gets validated. Okay. And so we don't have to go through the whole commit process, but at the moment we're still going through running the pipeline to see if it's valid, which is one of the problems I mentioned before that we wanted to get away from. Yeah. So thankfully, the validation process that happens when you start running a pipeline has been pulled out and put into a lint tool. So you can, without having to actually run the pipeline, you can lint the pipeline to get actually a surprising amount of syntax checking and error catching. Yeah. So for example, if I think, have I got it in my history here? I think I do. Yeah, here we go. So I'm using the, it's right down the bottom, I'm sorry. I'm using the SSH interface to call off to my Jenkins instance. So I'm just saying port that it's listening on, the SSH is listening on, the IP address, and then I'm calling the declarative linter command, okay? And I'm piping in my Jenkins file, just in the local directory. Yeah. So hopefully when I do this, it should tell me, yes, Jenkins file successfully validated. Yeah. But we can start screwing with it, basically, and breaking it. So let's save that and run my linter again. And it should immediately tell us, I'll pull this up a bit so you can see it. It should immediately tell us that, okay, you haven't got an agent. Okay. So I don't have to even run my pipeline to find these things out. So let me break it a bit more. So I can, leave quotes off, run my linter again. Okay, it expects, it was expecting a quote, found the end of the line. Yeah? I can even try and mess with it in terms of data types. So if I don't give it a string, but I give it an integer, yeah, and lint it. Okay, it was expecting an open quote, and actually, no, further up here. Yeah, expecting an open quote. Did I? Oh, no, sorry, I've still got the open quote. Okay, now I should get the message about the data types. Okay. Anyway, you get the point. Okay. So you can get down to this quite small cycle time. Okay. Edit it in your favourite editor. Pick off the linter. Oh, stupid error. Right, fix that. Do that cycle a bunch of times. Okay. It's passing the validation. Copy it into my replay. Run it. Awesome. Great. Commit it. Yeah. And so this cycle time can be much less cumbersome. Okay. Well, and eventually it'll get integrated into the editor, and we'll all be happy. Yeah.
You can also do that in the UI. Click away when you're writing to pass.
In the replay section.
Yeah. So if you say something.
If I break it here.
I mean, yeah, click away, probably in the
take the focus out.
Yeah, so then
Oh,
you get that.
I didn't know that. Thank you. That's really nice. That actually, now I'm torn because I want to do it in my editor, but that's really nice doing it in this editor.
I don't know if it cuts the same. I mean, I don't know if it's the same linter, but
Probably
it
is.
cuts many errors.
Probably is. Not catching that one. Okay. Anyway, I'll have a look at that. Sorry?
Try to fix it. I don't know if that's.
Yeah.
We fix that one.
It's being helpful.
Yeah,
Okay.
probably doesn't.
Hasn't caught that one. Yeah. But that's nice.
When you just say Groovy.
Yep, the scripted pipeline. Yeah. Okay, cool. Nice one. Okay. Yeah, sorry.
Is it possible to replay just one stage of the pipeline?
Rather than the whole thing.
Always a new build.
Yeah.
Let's say in some stages I will build some resources and I want to retest
Just the next one.
which is deploying something.
Yeah. Did you catch that? I don't know. Did you catch that? Is it possible to replay?
One stage of the pipeline.
Sorry?
Only one stage of the pipeline. Can I replay only that?
That's a great question. So we've got a plugin called Checkpoints. It's not rolling thread. So basically what it's actually a plugin that we developed commercially at Cloudbees, but we're making it open source. However, when we talk to people, the way that they use checkpoints, so what you can say is you can create a checkpoint, basically you can put these checkpoints anywhere in the pipeline, and then if the pipeline fails at that rate, like before, think of it like a game save point, right? You can create a save point, a checkpoint throughout the pipeline, and then restart the pipeline when it fails from that location. However, there's some issues with that, so that when you replay, it starts from that location, but it's an entirely new run of the pipeline. So many people want to have it like reuse the same build number, for example, is kind of important. And then the other one is exactly your use case. Most people don't want save points; they want to be able to restart a stage. So we've got some work there to do to make it more usable.
But is the round UI in the same workspace, like the same resources that we all have said before?
So there's there's steps for basically pushing and popping files back and forth to the server. So you have to maintain when you write your pipeline and your set checkpoint, you have to make sure you're maintaining a resumable workspace. So you're not guaranteed to get the same workspace ever, because otherwise your pieces will just fill up. Okay, no worries. It's in recognize. What's that mean? It's in recognize. Yes. Yeah. So there's another command. So what we have, there's an archive command which just stores an artifact permanently, and then there's like a stash and unstash command that you can just stash file, go to a different, run on a different server, unstash that file on another server, and so that's working with checkpoints is much like working between different agents, like having different parts of the pipeline on different agents. No.
Cool. Yeah.
So you mentioned there's an option for to change. So the step has the outcome of the step or a phase has changed. So I understand from that there's some sort of footprint to a stage. Wouldn't you be able to use that to build your phases in a way that they wouldn't run again based on the previous execution, and so optimize your recipe.
So use your you're talking about the conditional stages where you can say I only do this if.
So achieve what is aiming at, but just scripted.
Yeah.
Instead of relying.
So that you're setting certain, for want of better words, flags or whatever to indicate that.
Yes.
The state.
So just like that, there's you want to click back to the environment. So just like how you've got those environment blocks there's a block called when.
Yeah, I've got that here too.
Basically give you some conditions of your when.
Yep.
Sorry, I might have missed it. Yeah. So you can. I was switching it up. So you can use when to do this so that you can skip certain stages. So you might say, is this environment variable? You might say set environment variable, check that it's there later. or write a file out to disk somewhere to say, oh, I've got a checkpoint here. I only want to start from there. So like if these files, like if I've had a wedding example build and I've already done a build, I might touch a file and then check in the when. So if the file exists, just skip.
Yeah. So it's kind of your own, rolling your own checkpoint sort of behavior.
Until there's a better.
Yeah.
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 But checkpoints will be available like really soon, and there's really good documentation for it as well. So you can use it. I'll chase that up and make sure that I post it to Meetup group.
Cool. Cool. Are there questions? Can't remember where we're up to now. There's one more tool I wanted to talk about at least. So that was, what did we just talk about? We talked about replay, so that you can just sort of edit in place and rerun immediately. And we talked about the linter, so that you don't have to run to catch all your sort of mistakes. And the linter is actually quite smart because it doesn't just check for syntax errors, it also goes further and checks, my understanding is it goes further, and if it looks and sees that your pipeline is dependent on a plugin that isn't installed on this instance, it'll like pull those sorts of errors up as well. So it's not just syntax checking. Yeah. So yeah, kind of cool. There's one other. I'll come back to these links, but there's one other.
There was a quick question here about the linter.
Yep.
The question was, can I run the linter independent of Jenkins server? And
Okay.
yeah.
Well, I know what my answer to that would be, but you might. I might be wrong. The answer is going to be no.
So it's related to the point that you just made about plugins and checking the plugins. Because every step is actually defined by plugin in Jenkins. In order to do a valid linting, we need to actually send your Jenkins file off to the Jenkins server that you're going to run it on to get that linting happening and everything validated. So, just so you know. And I think like the kind of SSH thing, like that I'm going to show you, that kind of it's not so great. Like,
Oh, really?
It's complicated. I mean, no, that's fine. Like, but the way that we built that is not so great. So
Okay.
apologizing and saying, no, I'm going to make that better. So.
Okay. Yes, but if you read the docs about it, it actually goes to great pains to tell you to do it that way as a best practice. But yeah, I get what you mean. It could be less.
Could be better.
Yes. Okay. Cool. All right. So replay, linter. I've put links in here so that you can go straight to the docs on getting those set up. There is one other one which I'm kind of unsure about. There's a third-party unit testing framework for pipelines, for declarative pipelines. Actually, I think it's for all pipelines, but including declarative pipelines. And if you go up to GitHub and have a look at it, looks really powerful. I guess it's just a question of, I can totally see the scenario as to why you would, with a complex pipeline, why you would want to be able to mock out certain stages and test that your changes are correct. I guess it's just a question of how far down this path you go. That, James.
So this is particularly useful because there's a thing called pipeline shared libraries. So if you're in like a larger organization, right, and you have like a build engineering team or a DevOps team, and they were providing, Jenkins as sort of like as a service within the company to those developers. So what you would do is you create these shared libraries, say maybe everybody needs to have a security scanning step in their pipeline. So this team would like author a script, basically a pipeline script that you could use as a step in any pipeline, including a declarative one. And what they might do to make sure that that continues to work is actually write tests for it, just like as if you were writing a library, for Java or Python or whatever Node.js or whatever you're using. You can do that with pipeline as well. And I've seen some pretty crazy pipelines, like some of the biggest companies in the world use pipeline to power their deployment processes. And so as this level of sophistication goes up, obviously complexity goes up, and you need to treat it more like software than you would, a YAML file or something like that.
Well, it's pipeline as code, and code you test. Yeah. And that, actually, the discussion we were having at the start, that might be interesting for you, given you're doing that exact scenario we're talking about, these sort of shared objects and service, delivering this as a service. Yeah. Cool. Couple of links. Pipeline syntax. So lots of examples, lots of details about that, and then also the steps reference. And also remember the, I meant to put it on here, the snippet generator that I showed you. Yeah. So a combination of those things. Any other questions?
Probably saying you can show inside the script editor one more link that shows you everything that is available. That might be useful.
Sorry, say that again?
So if you go to the script, you know the little script generator?
Oh, the snippet generator. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
There.
Where was I? Was it in there? No. Where was I when I got to that? Here we go.
Yeah. Then there's one more link above the global variable reference at the end.
Oh, okay.
Show you everything that is available. Sometimes you can just read through that and use it.
Oh, okay.
Very useful. And when you create some shared libraries and you create some helper text, you will appear there.
Oh, okay, so this is dynamically
Dynamically
generated.
In the shared libraries.
Okay, very good. I'll put that in the slides before I post them. Yeah. Cool. All right, guys, hopefully that was useful. Pizzas are probably going cold, but...
I just have one question or ask, actually. So one of the things that so I work a lot on pipeline in Blue Ocean. Particularly, I'm looking for people who are just starting out, like adopting pipeline. And I'd love to talk to you a little bit more. What we need is a contract card, or we can write your email address in the packet or something. We'll do something, exchange contact details. I'd love to talk to you about how you're adopting it. Think of it like as well, like if I can come in with my team, we can do some free consulting, like for an hour. And we'd love to do that because it teaches us like what we need to fix in the product. And so we have like a good team. Our team works in open source, so like all the improvements that we get effectively from those conversations would be going back to the open source. So see if you ever use them for free.
Cool. Cool. All right. Thank you, guys. Let's have a drink and have some pizza. All right. Cheers.